Hello, my name is Scott Jarvis, and I'm a professor of linguistics at the University of Utah. My specialty is second language acquisition, and the phenomenon that I investigate within this specialty is called cross-linguistic influence. I'll say more about this in a few moments. Second language acquisition, or SLA, is the subfield of linguistics that explores how monolinguals become bilinguals and how bilinguals become trilinguals, and so on and so forth. It does this by investigating how the brain is capable of acquiring another language beyond your native language. What conditions are conducive to or even necessary for this to happen. How a person's knowledge of their second language changes over time. And why not all learners are equally successful, and also why they don't always learn in exactly the same way. One of the reasons for these differences between learners is cross-linguistic influence. This is also sometimes referred to as language transfer. Cross-linguistic influence is a matter of how the languages you already know affect the ways that you learn and use another language. Native language influence is the most common form of cross-linguistic influence. But importantly, your knowledge of your second language can also affect how you learn and use a third language, or it can also even affect how you use your native language. Some of my own research on cross-linguistic influence is focused on the learning of English as a foreign language in Finland by native speakers of Finnish and native speakers of Swedish. Importantly, Finnish and Swedish are not related to each other. But Swedish is related to English, and you can see here that many Swedish words bear a striking resemblance to their English counterparts. Swedish grammar is also very similar to English grammar. But Finnish is very different, both in terms of its vocabulary as well as in terms of its grammar. You can see here that it takes only 3 words in Finnish to say the same thing that takes 6 words to say in English and Swedish. Several years ago, I traveled to Finland to collect data from Finnish-speaking learners of English and Swedish-speaking learners of English. The main task I used was a Charlie Chaplin film. I showed the film to the participants, and then I asked them to write down what happened in the film. My data show a lot of really interesting cases of cross-linguistic influence. And at a general level, maybe the most profound finding is that Finnish speakers who have studied English for 6 years tend to achieve only the level of low intermediate proficiency in English, whereas Swedish speakers, after only 4 years of English, typically arrive at the advanced level of proficiency in English. So one of the substantial effects of cross-linguistic influence is how quickly and how well you can learn another language. But it can also affect the stages that a learner goes through, with some learners going through fewer stages than others. I'll give you an example. First, let me say that Swedish speakers, because of the similarities between Swedish and English, have a lot less to learn than Finnish speakers do. And so they also have fewer stages that they have to pass through in learning English. Here's an example of a stage that Finnish speakers go through, but Swedish speakers don't when learning English. It's the stage of article omissions. So Finnish-speaking learners of English, during their first few months or even years of learning English, typically don't use articles. And this is because their native language of Finnish doesn't have articles. What you see on the left side of the screen here is a text written by a Finnish-speaking learner of English who had studied English for 2 years. And I've marked all of the nouns where the learner should have used a or the, but didn't. That's a lot of words, a lot of cases where they're left out. The text that you see on the right was written by a Swedish speaker who had also studied English for only 2 years. But this learner didn't leave out any articles at all. And these patterns that we see in these 2 texts are typical of what we find in my data for the Finnish speakers and Swedish speakers in general. Importantly, by relying on their native language, and by relying on the fact that Swedish has an article system that works very similarly to that of English, Swedish speakers have a lot less to learn than Finnish speakers, and they also have to go through fewer stages of learning. But cross-linguistic influence is not just a matter of the mistakes that learners will or won't make. it also has to do with their preferences, the way they describe things, and how they do so differently depending on what their native language is. This is a scene from the Charlie Chaplin film where you see Charlie Chaplin and his new friend sitting in someone's front yard and talking. In English, we can say that they are sitting either on the grass or in the grass, depending on the height of the grass. Interestingly, the Finnish speakers and Swedish speakers have differing preferences for whether they're sitting in versus on the grass. In my data, most of the Finnish speakers say that they are sitting on the grass, while most of the Swedish speakers say that they're sitting in the grass. And this is the same thing that they do in their native languages. There are intriguing reasons for these differences that relate to their native language backgrounds. And I want to point out right now that this is one of the types of investigative research that second language acquisition researchers conduct. It turns out that Swedish speakers, just like English speakers, tend to rely on the height of the grass when determining whether they're going to say in the grass or on the grass. But Finnish speakers tend to rely more on the location of the grass, whether it's in a meadow or near a building. Past research has shown that cross-linguistic influence can occur in all areas of language use and also at all stages of acquisition. Current research shows that cross-linguistic influence affects what it is that learners understand when they hear or read the second language, how quickly they can process information that they hear or read in a second language, what they pay attention to, what they remember, and even the types of electrical and blood flow activity that take place in their brains when they're using a second language. Cross-linguistic influence and second language acquisition more generally are areas of research that bring together the science of linguistics with the scientific developments of other fields in useful and exciting ways. Thank you.